What is currently the best super steel that money can buy? That question in itself is one that is highly debated in the knife and EDC community. The fact of the matter is that the topic of the best super steel for knives is highly debated because it is such a crowded topic to begin with. There is M390, Magnacut, S90V, Rex 121, so on and so forth. But what is the best and what makes a steel the best? Is it a question that we can even answer? Today we're going to discuss in detail just how good Vanax Superclean really is. How's it going, everybody? I'm Rollshambo, the connoisseur and collector of all things sharp and shiny, and today, back by popular demand, is another episode of Steel Snobs, the series where I attempt to break down in easy-to-understand layman's terms just how good or not so good a knife steel really is. And given the current race for what should be the best super steel currently available, Vanax is actually one that is often referred to in hushed and whispered tones. Oh, it's got Vanax, Vanax, Vanax. And then we see that they typically put Vanax on very expensive stainless steel knives that cost hundreds and sometimes even thousands of dollars. So is it worth it? Is it really good? Is it a hyper steel, or is it just overrated? Make sure to put your prediction in the comment section down below and follow along to see just how close you were, because today we are going to make sure to compare it head to head with other popular stainless steels, including Magnacut, to determine just how good Vanax Superclean really is. Before we start putting Vanax Superclean against some of the world's best stainless knife steels, it's important to understand some key terminology here. And I am, of course, talking about the definitions of what toughness, edge retention, and corrosion resistance really mean. Starting off with toughness. According to Dr. Laren Thomas, whose knife steel rating sheet we are using for this, toughness is a measure of how much resistance a steel has to fracturing. Think, for example, of if you've ever had a knife that had a chipped edge, or if the knife broke. Toughness prevents chipping, fracturing, and your knife breaking due to too much force or impact. By contrast, edge retention is the knife's ability to maintain cutting ability during cutting. This could also be referred to, probably more accurately, as wear resistance, since technically speaking, the edge retention of a knife can be determined by many different factors. For example, it doesn't matter how hard the steel is or how sharp your apex on that edge is. If it starts to rust, that rusted edge will not cut or hold an edge for very long due to corrosion. And that finally brings us to corrosion resistance. For most people's use case scenarios, we are in fact talking about rust resistance. However, rust is not the only way that steel can corrode, and I would ask people to keep that in mind. Now, for the sake of getting as clean of a comparison as we possibly can, I have listed an assorted mix of 13 different stainless steels so that we can actually gauge just how good Vanax is first and foremost as a stainless steel, since that is in fact what it's known to do best. This steel list includes 14C28N, BD1N, LMAX, LC200N, M390, which is also known as 20CV or 204P, Magnacut, S110V, S125V, S30V, S35VN, S45VN, S90V, and then of course we have Vanax. Now it's important to say that even though there are many amazing steels on this list that I absolutely love, when it comes to corrosion resistance, there is in fact only one steel that is rated by Dr. Laren Thomas to be as corrosion resistant as Vanax, and that is LC200N. In that regard, they are dead tied with a rating of 10, which is about as high as you can currently get. Now that we know that Vanax is actually a giant when it comes to corrosion resistance, we need to kind of narrow down this list of 13 steels to see just how good Vanax really is. We'll start by eliminating knife steels on this list. for each one that has a toughness rating lower than Vanax. Vanax has a toughness rating of 5, and so for that reason, we are going to be eliminating BD1N, LMAX, M390, S110V, S125V, S30V, S45VN, and S90V, essentially leaving us with 14C28N, LC200N, Magnacut, S35VN, and of course, Vanax. After eliminating based on toughness that is less than what we currently get out of Vanax, which is a rating of 5, we are left with 5 of the original 13 stainless steels that we're comparing Vanax to. Those steels that are left include 14C28N, which has a toughness of 9, LC200N, which has a toughness of 8.5, Magnacut, which has a toughness of 7, and S35VN, which has a toughness of 5. So if we wanted to continue to narrow down this list to see what is actually just as good, if not better than Vanax, if there is any steel that is when it comes to the knife steel properties, the only category left is edge retention, also known as wear resistance. How long will the edge stand up to repeated cutting? Well, given that Vanax has an edge retention rating of 5.5, we have to look to see if anybody else on this list can beat it. And the answer to that question is simply no. For example, 14C28N has amazing toughness and really good corrosion resistance, but its edge retention is only rated at a 3. LC200N, very similar to 14C, also has an edge retention of 3. Magnacut is actually very close with an edge retention of 5, and so is S35VN with an edge retention of 5 as well. Essentially what this means is that Vanax is an extremely versatile and well-rounded out steel with amazing corrosion resistance. The fact of the matter is that if you were to add up each of these categories, you would end up with a cumulative score, or a score that I like to refer to as the edge fidelity score, and that is how good is a knife steel property overall. And while Vanax might not shine through with as much toughness as Magnacut or 14C or LC200N, it has better edge retention than all of those, which means that situationally speaking, it will hold an edge in more situations than those steels. It might actually be argued that the steel it's closest to is S35VN. However, S35VN falls woefully short of Vanax when it comes to the corrosion resistance. Despite being stainless, S35VN is not nearly as stainless as Vanax, and that brings me back to my original point, which is there is really only one steel that you could compare directly to Vanax when it comes to being stainless, and that is LC200N. Imagine Vanax as LC200N with really good edge retention by comparison. Both of these steels have a very high cumulative score, LC200N coming in at 21.5 and Vanax coming in at 20.5. The big difference maker being that LC200N has far superior toughness, but also much lower wear resistance. Does this mean that Vanax is the de facto best super steel that money can buy? Well, the easy answer to that is no. And the reason why I say that is because it's very, very situational. For example, while Vanax might have better edge retention than the remaining steels, it doesn't necessarily have as good of toughness. For example, LC200N, 14C, and Magnacut would all make for far better fixed blades than Vanax would. While Vanax, being extremely corrosion resistant to the point of being ridiculous, would make for a far better knife in saltwater environments. And then we also have to consider the cost of Vanax. Vanax currently does not appear in knives that cost less than $200 to $300 at the minimum, and it's also not super common. A lot of this is due to the fact that it's not easy to heat treat to optimal Rockwell hardness, which maxes out at 61 HRC. This has a lot to do with something called austenite, and if you want to learn more about that, I will make sure to link the specific article about heat treating Vanax from Knife Steel Nerds, and if you're really into the details, I would highly suggest checking that out. Meanwhile, all the other steels on this list can be found in knives for under $200 if you check for deals. And don't even get me started on knives that come in S90V, because while S90V might not have as much toughness as Vanax, which caused it to get eliminated early, S90V has far superior wear resistance, making it ideal in dry environments and high usage rate situations. It also goes without saying that none of this even matters if the heat treat isn't right. Every time I do one of these videos, you are sure enough to point out in the comment section that nothing matters if the heat treat hasn't been done properly and if the Rockwell hardness isn't up to snuff at the same time. And of course, the last caveat is always going to be the edge geometry. Dr. Laren Thomas, who I consider to be one of the foremost progenitors in knife steel knowledge, has said himself many times that the knife steel properties matter far less than the edge geometry when it comes to edge retention. And while edge retention might in fact be king, all of these ratings matter, because it doesn't matter how hard the edge is if it corrodes. It doesn't matter if it corrodes if it's going to break before it can even rust. While it's easy to choose a knife steel based solely on its wear resistance, I would highly suggest that you look further into the situations that you're going to be using the knife. For example, if you are using a fixed blade and you plan on batoning with it, I would definitely suggest getting a knife steel such as 14C28N, Magnacut, or even LC200N if it's available. But for everyone else with folding knives that they wish to take on their sailing cruise, look no further than Vanax, because you in fact will not be disappointed. However, if you do believe that edge retention is king, I'm going to point you to the next video, which is going to be my take on S90V.